Come and study the Holy Scriptures with us as Father Stephen DeYoung teaches verse by verse on the podcast, The Whole Counsel of God. Father Stephen holds a Ph.D. in Biblical Studies and is an Orthodox priest serving at Archangel Gabriel Orthodox Church in Lafayette, Louisiana.
So chapter 3, verse 1, it gets slightly less controversial now. We're through the arguments. Mostly. So, chapter 3, verse 1. My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. So this gets quoted a lot when you ask people to teach Sunday school. So what is this about? Well, I know at least a few of us here, not so much Arthur, but are on the internet. And one thing about the internet is a lot of people like to set themselves up as teachers. Including, you can go on Reddit, and there are people who on the Orthodox Christianity Reddit have the label catechumen on their profile, but who are wanting to explain Orthodox doctrine to everybody. It's kind of fascinating. And this isn't just an Orthodox Christianity thing. This is Christianity in general. This is just about everything on the internet. The internet is just a hive of this, right? I used to point out all the time that there are like 100 times as many people who write fan fiction as read fan fiction. Everybody has things they want to say, and an opinion they want to get out there, and beliefs they want to get out there, and not that many people want to listen to anybody else's. But this was true before the internet. This was true in the first century. There were people at churches. Lots of people wanted to be teachers. They wanted to be in charge. They wanted positions of authority. They wanted to be deacons. They wanted to be presbyters or priests. They wanted to be bishops. They wanted to be recognized. They wanted authority and positions. And St. James is saying, well, maybe you should think about that for a second, right? Because as we saw it, St. Paul made this point too, that the more authority, the more responsibility, the more gifts, the more knowledge we have, whatever God gives us, we're responsible for how we use it, right? And so before you decide you want one of these high positions and you want to be a leader, you need to think about the fact that there's going to be a stricter judgment that comes with that. I've said this before, but it bears repeating, right? On the day of judgment, when I stand before Christ, I'm not only going to have to give an account for myself, like we all will, I'm going to have to give an account for all the people in this parish. Right? And it's okay, I forgive you. Because I want forgiveness. And when our bishop stands before Christ, he's going to have to give an account for himself and for me and all of his other clergy and for all the people in all of his churches. How he acted concerning them, right? And so you are shouldering something when you move into that kind of position. When you become a mentor, when you become a leader, when you become a parent, when you become, right? All of those things carry that responsibility with it. And so St. James is saying, think carefully, right, before you step into that, because you're going to be held accountable. Verse 2, for we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Okay? So the 4 is because, right, we all stumble in many things. Right? So he's including himself. He uses we, right? So we all mess up, right? So volunteering for a stricter judgment might not be a good idea, right? But then he goes on to say, if you can manage to never mess up in your words, in what you say and what comes out of your mouth, then you're pretty much perfect. Right? Anybody who can do that can probably control everything they do with their body, right? Because that's what tends to slip first, right? Is what comes out of our mouth. Verse 3, indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Verse 4, look also at ships. Although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. Right? So he says, you've got this big ship, big sails, visible, but you turn the rudder and the whole thing turns. Right? And he says, just like that, your tongue's not a big part of your body, right? At least for most of us, right? It's proportionately relatively small. But it can talk pretty big compared to its size. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. Right? So you can light one match. I grew up in Southern California where we're prone to brush fires because we have a bunch of coniferous trees. You throw one match or a lit cigarette at a pile of pine needles, dry brown pine needles, you could burn a whole forest down. Acres and acres and acres and acres and acres. Right? Oh, by the way, I was going to add, you will sometimes see, like if you have the Little Red Antiochian prayer book, where they use a lot of King James-ish language, you will sometimes hear reference to our reins, R-E-I-N-S, reins. That's your tongue. That's an antiquated, and it's related to this, right, to what St. James here. So like in the prayers after communion, when it says, pass through all my body parts, through my joints, my reins, my heart, that's what it's talking about. And purify them, right? Purify your joints, purify your mouth, purify your heart.
I didn't know that. I always thought reins were tendons and things like that.
Yeah, no, that's covered by the joints part. So see how great a force a little fire kindles. Verse 6, and the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. So there you go.
That sounds serious.
Yeah. This is related to another thing that Christ says, right? Remember, Christ had this little interchange with the Pharisees about the fact that his disciples didn't wash their hands before they ate, right? Which it is recommended that you wash your hands before you eat for a variety of reasons. But they were insisting upon it because it was one of the, we've talked before about how the Pharisees, one of the ways they tried to help people keep the Torah, keep the commandments, was that they would do what they called building a hedge around the law, right? So that you would never even get close, right? So you can't take the name of the Lord in vain if you never say it, right? Like, for example, right? And so they had all the rules about the Sabbath, right? Well, what's work? Right? Well, you can't walk further than this, and you can't, right? All the specific ideals keep you far away from ever maybe breaking the rules. And so one of these had to do with maintaining ritual purity. And so they ask you wash your hands before you eat, before you do this, before you do that, right? To keep you away from potentially rendering yourself ceremonially unclean, which would mean you couldn't go to the temple, you couldn't do various things until you'd been cleansed. So Jesus' disciples, being a lot of them being fishermen, poor and from Galilee, right, weren't so big on the hygiene all the time, right? And so weren't following this. And so they come and complain to Jesus about it. And Jesus says something that is much misinterpreted, where he says to them that in the Torah, it is not what goes into a man that defiles him, but what comes out. Right? And he's actually making a very specific point about the Torah that's actually objectively true, right? If you look at the Torah, There is nothing there that says anything about washing your hands before you eat, but also that, like, because you touch food with dirty hands, that's going to make you unclean because you eat it, right? But there are a ton of commandments that say that you're unclean based on things that come out of you, like blood, other bodily fluids, right? For men and women, right? That makes you unclean until you're ritually cleansed. So he's making a point that they would have to agree with, right? Knowing the Torah. And then Christ takes that point to say, right, out of a man comes all kinds of blasphemies and foul talk, right? Same point St. James is making here, right? And that makes you unclean, right? So that's the point St. James is making here about your tongue can make your whole body unclean, right? By what it says, right? By what it says. And this is one of those things that's sort of objectively true, I think, in all of our experience, right? Like on the average day, I don't punch anyone, right? Like I don't physically assault anybody. I've got all that kind of thing under control. I can control my temper that much. But on the average day, I probably say something casually hurtful multiple times to somebody, right? I probably fail to say something I should say several times, right? That what we say in our speech, our communication, right? And of course, this isn't just speech, right? A deaf person who communicates through sign language can still make rude gestures, right? This is not just talking about verbal communication, right? You can type things on the internet, but our communication tends to be the place where we do the most damage. And like St. James is saying, when I was a kid, we always did the, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words could never hurt me. But there were things said to me where I would have much rather been punched in the face.
That is the most untrue.
Right, yeah. I think they thought if we kept saying that over and over again like a mantra, we might start to believe it. But it's not true, right? Like, as someone who's been punched in the face a few times, I'd rather be punched in the face than have certain people say certain things to me. Right? That can hurt a lot more and stick around a lot longer. Right? And that's what St. James is pointing at here. It's not hard to start something with a few poorly placed words that grows out of proportion into real destruction. Right? And so if this is the hardest place to control, then this is the place where we need to focus a lot of our effort at repentance. Verse 7, for every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. If you don't believe that, go on YouTube and look for videos of people with a pet lynx, a pet, I saw somebody with a pet jaguar the other day. Right? So there's somebody who's got a pet jellyfish and a pet octopus and a pet, every kind of creature in the world.
I actually do about that octopus.
Yeah. Verse 8, but no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in this similitude, in the image of God. Right? And what's the point there? Well, in the ancient world especially, but still today, what you do to someone's image, you're doing to them. Right? So there's a whole set of sermons by St. John Chrysostom called his Homilies on the Statues. If you read it too fast, you might think it says statutes, but it's not. It's statues. Because there was a riot where a bunch of statues of the emperor were vandalized. And St. John is interceding for those people who did it for mercy. Because you go and vandalize a statue of the emperor, it's like you're assaulting the emperor. Emperors didn't like that so much, right? They took it personal, right? And that's not something totally confined, right, to the ancient world, right? Like if I took a picture of someone you loved and I spit on it, you'd get the idea, right? That would be, if I took a picture of your mother and tore it up in front of you, you might hit me, right? Like that, you get the idea of what I meant by that.
When friendships and relationships break up, typically people turn away the picture or tear up.
Yeah, throw away all the photos. Yeah. So we still have that idea, right? And obviously that's built into how we understand icons, for example, right? But even our Protestant friends who aren't so much with the icons, right, are generally the way we say the Bible, right? I've never had a Protestant friend who would take a Bible and like chuck it on the floor and step on it, and right? You treat it with respect, right? So that idea carries it, right? And so this is very much part of, in the Old Testament, for example, when the command is given about capital punishment after the flood to Noah. He who spills man's blood, his blood must be spilled by man, because in the image of God, God created man. So what we do to our fellow human beings, we are doing to God. Right? We are effectively doing to God. And this is what lies behind, again, the parable of the sheep and the goats. Whatever you did to the least of these, you did to me. Because that person is in the image of Christ. Right? So if you spit on them, you're spitting on Christ. Right? Trample on them, you're trampling on Christ. So that's what St. James is saying here. You sing these praises to God our Father, and then you go to his image and you curse it. Right? That dog don't hunt, as they say over in Texas. Right? Verse 10, out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not be so. It's a very placid translation. This ought not be so. Verse 11, does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? That would be a no, right? Because, why? Because, well, if there's bitter water flowing out of the spring, it's going to make the whole thing bitter, right? So it's not that, blessings and curses, if there's curses coming out of your mouth, that's going to, the whole thing, right? He's saying it's going to be corrupted, it's going to be unclean, it's going to be tainted. Verse 12, can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh. Right? This is that fruit language again. Right? And another thing Christ said about our mouth, from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Right? Like a spring. What's welling up within us comes out of our mouth. And so this is what St. James is saying. So he's pointing to, remember, he started this out with a for. He started this out with a because related to the previous discussion. Right? And this is an important area of fruit. Right? He uses fruit as the metaphor here. It's an important area of our works, of our action, is what comes out of our mouth. Right? Because that is going to, as he says, that is going to transform us too. Right? That's going to change. How we speak is going to change. If what comes out of our mouth is corrupt and vile, we're going to become more corrupt and vile. If what comes out of our mouth is good and building people and is participating in what God is doing in the world. I mean, how did God create the world? He created the world by speaking. Right? Then that can change us too. Right? And this isn't like word faith magic stuff. Right, where we can change the universe by speaking things into existence. But it will change us. Right? It will change us. Verse 13, who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. Right? So this is a context thing. Remember how he started chapter 3. Let not many of you become teachers because of the judgment. Right? So, if someone among you is wise and understanding, meaning the kind of person who should be a leader, right? Who should be a teacher, let him show that by good conduct, that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. Right? So he's saying, if you desire that position, think twice, because there's going to be a stricter judgment. If you think you've got stuff under control, think about what comes out of your mouth, right? If you do want that position, then how do you demonstrate that? By your works, by your conduct, by how you live your life, right? And the way you live your life will reflect whether or not you have the meekness, the wisdom, the understanding that it takes to be a teacher, right? It's not unrelated to the faith and works thing, the faithfulness and works thing, right? Because the person who wants to set themselves up as a teacher is usually doing it because they think they know a lot. Well, the demons know more. Do you want them for a teacher? Right? So it's not based on knowledge, but it's based on wisdom and understanding, conduct, the way of life. That's what makes you a teacher or a mentor, right? Because teachers aren't, if faith, right, if faithfulness isn't just head knowledge, then teaching isn't just conveying knowledge, right? Teaching is modeling transformation, right? And leading and being transformed into the likeness of Christ. Verse 14, but if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. So this is the flip side, right? What's the opposite of the meekness of wisdom, right? Is envy and self-seeking in your hearts, and what happens with what's in your heart? It comes out through your mouth as boasting and lying against the truth, right? Verse 15, this wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, and demonic. Right? Again, tie that in. The demons know all this stuff, right? And could maybe tell you all this stuff, right? But that's not what needs to be, that's not what teaching is, right? Verse 16, for where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Right? So if you have two people who are presenting themselves as teachers, right? And you want to know which one of these people should I be the disciple of? Right? This is your qualifications, right? Because the way they should show themselves to be a teacher is through their conduct, the way they live their life. And these are the marks you should be looking for. Because if it's coming from God, if the wisdom they have to give you is coming from God, working in their life, then you'll see purity. You'll see someone who's peaceable. You'll see someone who's gentle, who's willing to yield, meaning they're not demanding their way all the time and insisting they're always right. Right? Full of mercy and good fruits. There's the fruit again, right? That you'll see in their life. Without partiality, right? They're not going to treat some people differently than others. And without hypocrisy. You're not going to see them teaching one thing and doing something else, right? So again, this is within this framework. What qualifies someone to be a teacher is that their life is being transformed. And you see that in their life, right? Because our goal is to be transformed. And so we want to follow someone who we see that happening in their life, right? Not just someone who knows a lot, right? And has a PhD. I'm warning you off from it. No. We're canceling Bible study. No. So, verse 18. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. We'll go ahead and stop there. It really keeps going, but time-wise, I think, before we go in any further. And we'll come back to this, right? The fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace, right? I was talking about sowing fruit, right? So what is this talking about? This is comparing being a teacher to planting. Right? So if I'm a teacher, right, which I guess I am, technically, then my goal with the people I'm teaching is to plant in their life what will hopefully bear fruit, right? To plant something in their life so that that transformation will take place, right? So that this will happen. And the way that you do that is peaceably by someone who makes peace, right? Meaning, I know you're going to say something. That's not by arguing with you, right? It's not by calling you names and telling you you're wrong, right? And all of that, right? But it's by sowing that in your life peaceably, someone who's trying to make peace. And this is going to be particularly related to tease where this is going next, to the fact that among whomever St. James is writing to, there seem to be a lot of factions and people fighting and arguing about things and people going at it hammer and tongues, not in a way that's like sharpening everybody up and helping them hone their faith, right, or something, but just war, right, at war with each other, right? And one of the sure signs St. James is saying of somebody who you shouldn't be following as a teacher is that they're trying to get an army together to make war on somebody else. Right? Where they're trying to create a faction. They're trying to create a following for themselves that then they're going to go after other factions. Right? That's not somebody, right, whose wisdom is coming from God. That's somebody who's more like the demonic wisdom he talks about. Because what do the demons do? They're rebels. Right? They're rebelling. They're trying to do their own thing. Right? Rather than getting on board with what God is doing. And part of what God is doing is making peace and restoring peace. Right? Especially among followers of Christ, right? With each other. Right? So we'll go ahead and stop here.
Listen next time as Father Stephen DeYoung continues his study of the Scriptures on the whole counsel of God. Father Stephen's email address is wholecounsel@ancientfaith.com. That's wholecounsel@ancientfaith.com.